Okay, continuing that figure of global and regional risks, let's look at a bit more specific examples of regional key risks as they are termed here. So again, a little bit of a wind there, but I think the sound is still okay. Absence of risk diagrams does not imply absence of risks within a region, so just that there is no data or no literature. The development of synthetic diagrams for small islands, Asia and Central and South America, was limited due to the paucity of adequately downscaled climate projections. Okay, remember Cordex, the coordinated regional downscaling experiments, which did a good job on downscaling the projections, but then people have to use it and produce local assessments, which are not always done based on various reasons or limitations. With uncertainty in the direction of change, the diversity of climatologies and socio-economic contexts across countries within a region are not always available, and the resulting few numbers of impact and risk projections for different warming levels. So here are the risks listed, at least of medium confidence level, so it's either medium or above. Small islands, so you have issues like loss of terrestrial, marine and coastal biodiversity and ecosystem services, loss of lives and assets, risks to food security and economic disruption due to disruption of settlements and infrastructure. So small islands have a very unique problem to face because of the sea level rise, and especially in the hotspots of, let's say, Indo-Pacific warm pool, where sea level rise is faster, then these are very unique threatened systems in terms of small island existence and livelihoods, and even some islands have made plans to evacuate the entire island if things get really bad. So economic decline, livelihood failure of fisheries, agriculture, tourism, and from biodiversity loss from traditional agro ecosystems, reduced habitability of reef and non-reef islands, leading to increased displacement, risk to water security in almost every small island. Okay, so I read all of that just as an example, but in North America you have issues of mental health outcome, mortality and morbidity due to increasing temperatures and extremes, risks to degradation of marine, coastal and terrestrial ecosystems, freshwater resources are threatened, risk to food and nutritional security, risks to well-being, livelihoods and economic activities. And in Europe you have risks to people, economies and infrastructure, stress and mortality, marine and terrestrial ecosystem disruptions, water scarcity to multiple interconnected sectors, losses in crop production, and so on. Central and South America, again, water security is an issue, health effects, coral reef ecosystems, food security, life and infrastructure due to floods, landslides, sea level rise, storm surges and coastal erosion. Australasia, degradation of tropical shallow coral reefs, so Great Barrier Reef is now a poster child for warming impacts and acidification impacts. Special geoengineering approaches are being considered, like brightening the clouds over the Great Barrier Reefs and so on. Of course, we have a long way before they will be tried, and especially whether they can be sustained long enough to protect the corals and so on. Loss of human and natural systems and increased heat-related mortality and morbidity, and loss of alpine biodiversity in Australia due to less snow. Most people don't even think of snow in Australia, but there you are. Asia, of course, large region like Africa, urban infrastructure damage, impacts on human well-being and health due to flooding, especially in coastal cities and settlements. Most polluted cities are in Asia, but that's not necessarily a climate change issue. Biodiversity loss and habitat shifts, more frequent and extensive coral bleaching and subsequent coral mortality, decline in coastal fishery resources, risk to food and water security. Okay, and Africa, species extinction and reduction or irreversible loss of ecosystems and their services, including freshwater, land and ocean ecosystems, risks to food security, risks to marine ecosystem health, and to livelihoods, of course, in coastal communities. Increased human mortality and morbidity due to increased heat and infectious diseases, vector-borne diseases and diarrheal diseases, reduced economic output and growth, and increased inequality and poverty rates, increased risk to water and energy security due to drought and heat. Okay, so here are the amber diagrams looking at global surface temperature change like we did before, and looking at regional systems. So food production from crops, fisheries and livestock in Africa already in moderate risk, biodiversity and ecosystems already in moderate risk, reasonable confidence there, mortality and morbidity from heat and infectious diseases transitioning very quickly into moderate and high risks, delayed impacts of sea level rise in the Mediterranean. So you can see already we are in moderate risk. Water quality and availability in the Mediterranean, again, no good news there. Health and well-being in the Mediterranean. Water scarcity to people in southeastern Europe, already transitioning into moderate and high risks. 1.5 is going to threaten many of these things, which is what got reported as a special report on 1.5 degrees C in 2018, right? So coastal flooding and people and infrastructure in Europe, heat stress, mortality and morbidity to people in Europe, already you can see the risks. This is the current level of warming, so we have already transitioned into many of these risks. Just to conclude this part, loss and degradation of coral reefs in Australia, cascading impacts on cities and settlements in Australia, reduced viability of tourism and related activities in North America. A lot of risk already here. Costs and damages related to maintenance and reconstruction of transportation infrastructure in North America, already at risk. Lyme disease in North America under incomplete adaptation scenario, already high confidence that we have entered moderate risk and transitioning to higher risk by the time we cross 1.5. And finally, sea ice ecosystems from sea ice change in the Arctic, changes in fisheries catch for pollock and Pacific cod in the Arctic, costs and losses for key infrastructure in the Arctic, sea ice dependent ecosystems in the Antarctic, and changes in krill fisheries in the Antarctic. Krill, which is a very key nutritious food for many of the whales that migrate all the way from northern polar circle into the southern polar circle, or at least Southern Ocean, are going to suffer because of this. So there is large scale impacts on this, and these whales have significant contribution to the ecosystem in terms of iron fertilization and so on. I have podcasts on whales as a part of the nature-based solutions elsewhere that you can look up. Okay, so let me leave that there and come back to this last part on diverse and feasible climate responses and adaptation options that exist to respond to representative key risks of climate change. As I said, when IPCC assessment report started, adaptation was not even talked about, or was considered to be not a good thing to talk about, because it would be saying that we are unable to deal with our impact on climate change in terms of mitigation and so on. But obviously in the last 20-30 years we have come far in terms of increasing our emissions by a lot, increasing our impact by a lot, accelerating the warming and sea level rise and extreme events and health impacts and so on. So obviously now adaptation is not only necessary to talk about, but great plans are needed to deal with adaptation plans for livelihood impacts, extreme events, crop damages, water security, food security, health impacts. And the next podcast also looks at unforeseen shocks. And strangely enough, during this process of releasing the AR6, we dealt with the pandemic, and it did affect the release dates of the AR Assessment Report 6, and it is still affecting it. There are many delays, and we have had another unexpected shock from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has perturbed the energy supply and many other supply chains across the globe, and again given us a wake-up call on how hard it is to maintain climate action under these sorts of expected and unexpected shocks in the geopolitical and socio-economic natural hazard systems like earthquakes, tsunamis, damages to various nuclear plants, and so on and so forth. So this is a never-ending situation in terms of perturbations. So the stylized diagram in the next podcast talks about how to keep our focus and make the good social choices to head towards the so-called climate resilient development. Okay, so we'll come back and look at that.